Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar, Safety and Wellness, the combination that drives engagement and profitability. This event is brought to you by ISHN and it's sponsored by All-Star and Sonic Boom. I'm your moderator, Maureen Paraventi, web editor for ISHN. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's presenters are Brian Galanick and Dana Korn. Brian is the president of All-Star Incentive Marketing and a 30-year expert in delivering safety and wellness programs and a member of Incentive Engagement and Solution Providers. Dana is the co-founder and chief energizing officer at Sonic Boom, an award-winning health tech company specializing in corporate well-being and a pioneer of the engagement category of wellness. You are welcome to ask questions. Submit them as we go along, and later on in the program, Brian and Dana will address as many of them as possible. Today's event is being recorded and archived. And now I'm excited to turn it over to today's first presenter, Brian Galanick.
Thank you, Maureen. I really appreciate that intro. And I want to thank Dana up front for joining me in this presentation. I want to thank everybody online and on the phone here for joining us as well. We have a great turnout for this, so the topic itself is clearly of interest to the group of safety-sensitive professionals that are on the line with us here today. Safety and wellness, the combination that drives engagement and profitability. Here's the agenda. We're going to talk, and I want to get in and out of some of these things fairly quickly, but I want to give you a high-level overview of what we're going to talk about. So the engagement foundation, right? Why does everything roll back to engagement? My guess is if you're on the phone here today, you've spent a lot of time in recent years hearing about employee engagement as the path towards solving many of the problems you might have in your company, and we're going to talk about why that's so fundamental to this overall discussion. We're going to touch on intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation and how we build muscle memory with the programs that we create. We're going to talk about why workplace wellness matters and the specific links between safety and wellness. I'm sure you're aware of some of them, but we want to point to some that maybe you haven't necessarily considered. Talk about keys to success and mistakes to avoid, and really focus on how to brand and communicate a program for ultimate success. So the first slide I want to review sort of tells that engagement story at a very high level. This is a graph, you may have seen it before or something like it, but what it's really pointing out here is that highly engaged companies, those in the top 25% based on surveying and exit polls, versus those in the bottom 25% in terms of engagement within their industry, this is the difference that we see out there. So if you're in a poorly engaged company, okay, relative to your peers, you're experiencing, if you're near that bottom quartile, you're experiencing much higher levels of absenteeism, much higher levels of turnover, shrinkage, safety accidents, incidents, also health and wellness related incidents. If you're in that top 25% relative to your peers, you have much better customer retention, much better productivity, and much better profitability. This slide at a very high level pretty much indicates what we're here to talk about. You don't want to be in that bottom 25%, and not only do you want to be in the top 25%, you want to be in high in that chart as you can in order to ensure that your workers are engaged properly and you're able to get the message the company wants to get through. Okay, this is the kind of chart, we'll talk a little later on about how to get these programs and solutions approved by the C-suite and corporate executives and get buy-in. This is the kind of chart that will help do that. You don't want to be on the wrong side of the scale, and if you are, you're basically on your way out of business. So we ask a question, and so the first poll question should be up on screen. I've asked this question a number of times over the last 10 or so years doing these webinars, and it's good to measure the results from one year to the next. You have a choice. I'd ask you to click one of those 5 choices on your screen. What percentage of your employees do you feel are engaged at work? It's definitely an esoteric question, right? It's not something you may, well, maybe you do. If you know the exact number of engagement based on a previous survey, go ahead and plug that in or hit that range. But if you're not sure and you just want to go by feel, I would say to you just at a glance, based on the way it feels to you looking around your company, what percentage of your workforce seems to you to be an engaged population? And I can see everybody actively clicking and the answers coming in here. I'm just going to drag my feet for another 30 seconds or 10 seconds because they're piling in quickly. And then just another moment here, I'll push the results out and you can see for yourself where these results fall. So that looks pretty good. One more click. Okay, so here we go. So here's how you answer the question. And there were, I don't even know, 600 or 700 people registered for this webinar. So this is very statistically significant. We've got good numbers out there to back up how this data just came in. And frankly, this is sort of a mirror image to what we've seen in previous webinars and really to what the industry as a whole gets when they ask this question. Most popular answer, I think 60 to 79% of my workforce is engaged at work. Second most popular answer is 40 to 59. Okay, so safe to say the vast majority of people on the phone here think 40% or greater of their employees are engaged, and really over half of you, or just about half, 47%, think it's 60% and up. And power to those that feel like it's 80 to 100. And I'm not here. Obviously, it's a one-way conversation. While I'd rather be able to hear back from you, webinars are such that I can't. But I don't doubt for a minute some of you probably hit that number on the head. But here's the unfortunate truth of it. And again, a lot of companies on the phone here, so I can't tell you anything specific about where you're calling from. But if you're anywhere near the average numbers in this country, you overestimated the engagement levels in your company. And that's important because that may be one of the first places to look later on as we talk more in the webinar for why the safety message and the wellness message isn't getting through the way you want it to. So here's the State of the American Workplace Study. It's out there. You guys can Google it and find it online. You can email me and I'd be happy to send it to you. But what does this show? And the study's been going on for years, really decades. It's surveyed at this point probably 1 million or more people, very statistically significant. And it shows that only about 30% of U.S. workers are actively engaged at work. Okay, those are your intrinsically motivated, highly energetic people who are truly engaged and motivated to work harder, smarter, safer, and be healthier on the job. Another 50% plus or minus are not engaged. Doesn't mean they're bad employees necessarily. In fact, many are very good employees, but they're not really highly engaged at work, and so it's tougher to get a message through to them. And about 20% you should probably fire tomorrow. They're actively disengaged, and frankly, not much is going to get through to that group. But what this starts to show you is sort of that middle 50, that middle 60% of your workforce that properly motivated could change their behavior, but only if you can figure out how to get to them and get engaged. Okay, huge cost to the U.S. economy, $500 billion a year based on this disengagement level. And something that's even scarier, millennials are now the largest part of the workforce. You've probably heard that as well. And millennials themselves are the type of group that really do crave engagement. They're the ones that live that mantra that, you know, it's people don't quit the company, they quit the manager. Millennials need managers who engage with them and where they feel like their efforts are recognized. And here again, sort of back to that first slide, engaged teams have far fewer accidents, quality defects, healthcare costs, and what have you. So moving forward, and just a second, there it is. Okay, so I mentioned earlier intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators. Intrinsically motivated people, maybe some of us on the phone are intrinsically motivated. If not, you certainly know people that are intrinsically motivated, and basically companies don't have to spend a lot of time figuring out how to work with these people because they get it right out of the gate. However, these are among the people that are the most important to your company and the ones that you definitely, desperately don't want to lose, okay? And having the right levels of engagement is a way to do that. So how do we get to the rest of them? How do we get to the extrinsically motivated people, those that might need a nudge, and that represents the largest segment of any workforce? Well, there's best path there related to this topic is to put some sort of a program or programs in place that specifically find a way to recognize the efforts of those employees on a regular basis and reward them for going above and beyond. All right, in the safety world, that's obviously performance, but it's making safety suggestions, it's joining safety committees, mentoring new employees, going above and beyond, becoming a behind-the-wheel instructor, getting CPR training, learning how to use the AED. You could fill in a million examples, but there are plenty of people in your company that with the right nudge and the right reward would go ahead and take an extra step towards being a safer worker, and programs like this are the ones that help get them there. What we're actually heading for, what we're hoping for, is a cultural change, right? So you take those people who are not necessarily intrinsically motivated, and you recognize and reward the behaviors that they're taking along the way, and you start to get them to really evolve into a greater and a better safety and more engaged culture and a safer and healthier culture, okay? We here at my company, All Star Incentive Marketing, we run a lot of different wellness-related activities and programs, including Biggest Loser competitions and what have you. And I can tell you that over the years, there are plenty of people who have lost weight and gained it back, and I might fall into that category myself. But there are plenty of other people who work here and have been here for a decade or more who lost weight at a Biggest Loser competition 5 years ago and have never put it back on. And you can see them in the kitchen at work using a blender to make healthy shakes and do what have you to continue to eat healthy. And it's the same thing on the wellness side, on the exercise side, right? We've had walking competitions, and we have people here who put on a Fitbit and started tracking their steps and have never looked back. So what we start to do by building culture over a period of time and by putting the right recognition and reward in place is we start to get people who eventually build muscle memory and become more intrinsically motivated over a period of time, and that's really where these programs kick in to a higher gear. Okay, I want to kick it over to Dana right now. Dana's going to talk about wellness and specifically the need for wellness in the workplace.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. I'm also really excited that we're taking safety out of its box and we're taking wellness out of its box, and we're realizing how engagement and culture can tie these things together. So really excited to be talking about this today. And the big question always comes down to, why do we do wellness at work? And number one, well, first, let's talk about studies showing lately that people value a wellness program whether they participated in it or not, and that is going to enhance your ability to recruit and retain good people. But also it's where we spend the majority of our waking hours. It's also where we can define culture because we're with other people. So for instance, today one of my coworkers said, I wasn't going to go for a run, but our coach grabbed us and said, come on, we're going to do this together. That is culture, and we're spending more hours at work than anywhere else. Also, most workplaces are sedentary. We have to change that. We'll be talking a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. We're busy, so we're picking convenience over nutrition. It's way easier to pull in, if you're a truck driver, pull in and grab a candy bar than it is to bring a homemade lunch to work with you. More than 80% of chronic disease is preventable with healthier lifestyles. And most importantly, we're happier when we're feeling healthy, and we're healthier when we're feeling happy. And that means that you're going to have more things: camaraderie, teamwork. Healthier employees are happier employees, and they're more productive. Also excited to talk about the fact that we can change our healthcare crisis. So yes, we are in the midst of a healthcare crisis. It's no secret. You've got to be hiding under a rock if you don't know that. Starbucks spends more on healthcare than it does on coffee. General Motors spends more on steel than on healthcare, than it does on steel. And Warren Buffett summed all that up by saying General Motors is a health and benefits company with an auto company attached. And unfortunately for most companies, healthcare is the second largest expense after payroll. This puts employers in the healthcare business. But the problem with that is that the healthcare spend is really sick care. Employers are focused on what they're spending on sick people, not what they should be doing to prevent people from being sick or injured. And that's where wellness comes in. A lot of this has to do with our society. So we're in a society where we are facing things like portion distortion. Years ago, people had much smaller portions. Even in a restaurant, you would go in and the average plate size was 8 or 9 inches. Today you go in and the average plate size is 12 inches. We're all looking for that value meal. We're all looking for how much we can get for how much bang we can get for the buck. And unfortunately, the portion distortion means that our calories are on the rise. Not to mention, we're taking in all the wrong calories. There are other factors, and in this audience that we're talking to today, with safety being a focus, sitting and sedentary populations is a real big problem. So a lot of people talk about sitting being the new smoking, and that's a real issue. The good news is that the good things you're doing in your life are going to add up. So unfortunately, the bad things are too. We eat about 240 pounds of sugar every year. 100 years ago, we only ate 9 pounds. Most Americans, or many Americans, don't exercise at all, and most Americans don't exercise nearly enough. But the good news is that with small changes in our routine, in our lifestyle, and this is where culture really plays a part if we're doing this together, those small changes really add up. So for instance, if you eat 100 fewer calories every day, or you burn 100 more, you're going to lose 10 pounds a year. Think about how incredibly easy this is to do. You do a few jumping jacks on your pre-shift meetings, or you leave the cheese off of your sandwich. You leave a piece of bread off of your sandwich. Each of those things equals that 100 calories that could be 10 pounds per year.
You know, Dana, that's a great point, by the way. I just want to jump. I just did a call this morning and talking to that client about pre-shift stretching and talking about how many calories were burnt in a pre-shift stretch. I mean, you talk about getting double bang for the buck there. You have stretching in order to get our industrial athletes in good shape and ready for a shift, and at the same time they're out there doing that pre-shift stretching. They're burning that 100 calories that you're talking about that adds up over a period of time.
Yeah, and not to mention the culture that we keep coming back to. We're talking about culture so much in today's webinar and in today's society. Culture, by definition, means that you're not addressing people individually. You are addressing them as a group. So when you grab 10 buddies and say, let's go do our pre-shift stretch, then, you know, it's like dance floor mentality at a wedding. The music's good and you want to dance, but until somebody else does it, you may not be the one to get out there on the dance floor. One person does it and everybody does. So that culture and working together is such an important part of all of this. So I talked about sitting being the new smoking. This is not a new phrase. This goes back about 10 years when somebody came up with this clever phrase. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with an environment where safety is such an incredibly important issue, you're talking about many sedentary workers. You're talking about people who are sitting, they're driving, they're often incredibly sedentary. And this can cause all sorts of problems in terms of your metabolism and even your neurological inputs and outputs, your cholesterol levels, things that people don't even think about. And this is just one of the many things that our society does to contribute to the problems that we face today in healthcare. So in a nutshell, environment is both a challenge and a solution. So the challenge is that environment is what makes preventing injuries and sickness tough, in the sense that you may have workers that are inherently put at risk every day, whether it's because they're driving a truck, they're lifting heavy items, they're swinging a hammer. But the solution is that that environment can reflect a culture of prevention if the employers work, typically from the top, to make it so. A lot of people tell me, well, I can't help it. I'm heavy because it runs in my family. Oh, sorry, Brian, I didn't hit that slide yet, the one before. A lot of people tell me, I can't help it. Heavy people run in my family, and so I can't do anything about it. And we would say, au contraire, too bad, so sad, you're going to have to take responsibility for yourself, because as I mentioned earlier, 75 to 80% of chronic illness is not just preventable, but this is the cool part, guys. It's not just preventable, it is reversible through lifestyle change. Sometimes changes in our lifestyle. I would never say to somebody, hey, go lose 65 pounds this year. I'd say focus on today, focus on this minute. What can you do to make tiny changes in your lifestyle? So good news, bad news is that we are in full control. I know sometimes people are like, I want that magic pill. I don't want to have to change my lifestyle. Wouldn't it be nice if that's how it worked? So what is the secret? Well, first of all, we've got to ask ourselves, what's the secret to engagement? We're talking about engagement here. We're talking about how valuable people think a wellness program is, but how do you get them to engage in a wellness program? And why do so many wellness programs fail? You'll read study after study about the wellness programs being worthless, and that's because they're done poorly. So one of the secrets that we can't talk about today because we don't have nearly enough time is, how do you drive engagement in a wellness program? But let's talk also about the secret of a lifestyle, healthy lifestyle. So clearly, when you improve your lifestyle, you're going to improve your cholesterol, you're going to look better in your genes, you're going to feel better, all of that stuff. What people don't realize is that healthy lifestyles, or an improvement in your lifestyle, and even small improvements count, add up to all sorts of things that you may not think about. Your mood, your energy, fertility. Did you realize that oftentimes fertility can be linked to poor nutrition, fertility issues? But beyond that, and as it's concerned here today, safety issues. So when your lifestyle improves, you're more present, you're paying more attention, and safety becomes an important focal point for you. Better relationships at work and at home. Again, that decreases presenteeism. Presenteeism is where people are at work, but they're not really at work because they're thinking about their crummy fight they had with their husband last night, or they're thinking about how sick they feel. Presenteeism is a huge problem today, but improving lifestyle can touch every aspect of our lives. This comes down to something we call VOI, value on investment.
Perfect. Dana, thank you. I appreciate that insight. And again, in our efforts to make the connection here between wellness and safety, really, really good information. And we're going to, after this poll question here, we're going to touch back on that and kind of give some specific examples. Some you may have thought of, maybe others you haven't. But let's take a look at this poll question now as well. And by the way, we're going to share the deck after with anybody who wants it. You can have the deck. You can have a copy of the presentation, the audio if you want, including the poll results. So if you want to see after how your fellow safety-sensitive professionals and others have answered these questions, we'll be happy to share it with you. And on top of that, any Q&A. So any questions asked, and you can type them into your browser at any given moment. Please do so. We're going to take all those questions at the end of this webinar. I'm going to go ahead and answer, Dana and I are going to go ahead and answer a couple, maybe 3, 4, 5 of those questions before we wrap it up. But any question we don't get to today while we're talking, we will answer after the fact, and then I'll push those answers out to everybody. So great job answering this question. I see those coming in right now. I'm going to push it here in a second. How would you rate the features and effectiveness of your current wellness program? You can see the choices there. And let me push that
I'm
out.
impressed.
So,
I'm impressed.
yeah.
There's a lot of somewhat effectives, and I'm really impressed by that.
Yeah,
I'm glad
good,
to hear
good
it.
to see. Good to see for sure that there are people out there that see their program as effective and presumably have evidence to that, to that back that up. But look at what else we see, right? So somewhat effective, fine, but you also have the ineffective and very ineffective percentages, or even effective, which sort of call that a push. 20, 27, 36% or so feel like it's effective or worse. Another 36% feel like it's somewhat effective, and obviously the real low-hanging fruit here for companies is 27% of you either aren't aware of your wellness program or don't think you have one. And so there really isn't a difference between those two. If you know for a fact you don't have one, or you can't remember anybody talking about one, you're pretty much in the same ball game. And so a lot of opportunity there for a company that doesn't have a wellness program or an effective wellness program to consider bringing that on board as a way of improving not just health and wellness, but also safety. And so how was that connection made? Again, some of this I'm quite certain many of you have thought of before, but obesity, which is obviously a huge problem in this country, even a bigger problem in certain classes of workers, including drivers. Obesity is a huge problem. Obesity is the #1 cause of sleep apnea. Sleep apnea leads to tired driving, and tired driving leads, of course, to accidents. So I mentioned a little earlier when I jumped in on something Dana was saying that I was on a call earlier today with a client or a prospect, and I was just listening in, but at one point that prospect had jumped in. It's a company with about 1,000 people, a lot of drivers, sort of in the waste industry, and that company jumped in while we were talking to them and talked about exactly that note down the bottom there, that they have drivers. First of all, they have a high turnover in drivers. Second of all, they need drivers and can't find enough of them, like so many others in the country, and that their standards for hiring a driver, including not looking at people with type 2 diabetes, but they may have to change that standard pretty soon because they can't find enough drivers. And obviously diabetics being, having the issues with getting Class 2 driver's licenses and what have you, and those federal exemptions. So there's a real cost associated with that, and of course there's a real safety cost associated with not having enough drivers. You have people, your existing drivers, covering extra shifts. They're driving irregular routes. They don't know as well. And of course, every time we have to cover a shift for a driver with somebody who just joined the company, it's not likely to be as safe as if the guy who'd been there 8 years was driving. So pretty clear connection between wellness and safety, as is this one. Smoking, stress, and obesity are all linked to absenteeism, right? I think that's pretty obvious. I think if you're on the phone and you're a safety manager, who's more likely to miss a day of work than who's not, and people who have more medical and health-related issues are more likely to miss work. And here again, absenteeism causes disruptions. Who's going to drive that shift? Who's going to run the forklift? Who's handling the packing station, the manufacturing application, or even the office workers? It doesn't make a difference. All of that disruption leads to an expense for the company, and to the extent that disruption leads to accidents, injuries, or other damage to company property, it's going to lead to a cost, right? One stat that really caught my eye was that on average, smokers take roughly 6 days of smoke break every year. All right, that's obviously adding up to your 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there. And if they're driving your vehicle, maybe they're still doing their job while they're smoking, if that's even allowed. But otherwise, generally speaking, they're less productive than their fellow coworkers. I think we all know people who smoke, and we all want them to quit for their own health benefits. But this one is one of those win-win-win situations for company, employee, and everyone else around them, fellow coworkers, when a really well-built wellness program can help encourage somebody to quit smoking. Stress. Stress is the new buzzword in many wellness circles or many health circles. You now see people talking about in their company the Family Medical Leave Act, and people actually claiming that they're under so much stress they need to go out on FML leave, and you have to hold their position for them and for months at a time, and wait for them to come back because they're out on a stress leave. And I don't think that's something my grandfather and his fellow coworkers, or my father for that matter, would ever have done. But in the world we live in now, stress is a real thing. It was real back then, but it's real enough now, and the world is more forgiving in that regard. And stress is the kind of thing that can actually cost you man hours and employees. And needless to say, it leads to things like high blood pressure, and the high blood pressure leads to things like poor decision making. We know we're not thinking clearly when we're under that level of stress, which of course leads to more accidents and injuries, right? And stress-related worker compensation claims are very much on the rise, one of the leading increases over the recent years. And example number four, and this one sort of swings the other way, which is absence of a company-sponsored wellness program, right? The 27% who said we don't have one, let alone the other probably 20% or so that we have one, but it's not very good. Absence of a good company wellness program is a missed opportunity to connect better with your employees, to engage better with your employees, and as a result, it's a missed opportunity at improving morale. And low morale, of course, leads to less team building. It leads to higher turnover, and higher turnover, of course, for the reasons we've just touched on, again, leads to greater safety challenges, right? So it's all interconnected, right? I understand that corporate America, Dana and I talked about this recently, corporate America, of course, still has its silos, and operations budgets don't necessarily intermingle with HR budgets and safety budgets and what have you, but to the extent that maybe the funding for a really well-built wellness program lives in one spot and the funding for a really well-built safety program lives in another, part of the real goal here is to help encourage you to find ways to bring those two together for exactly this purpose, because they're truly not in any way unrelated. They're directly related. They're not even flip sides of the same coin. They really are the same coin here. They will help improve your safety as a whole, and with the added benefit of making your people healthier and happier along the way.
Before you leave the morale thing there, Brian, I would like to just point out that a well-designed wellness program, and that's a key, those words are very key because ineffective wellness programs aren't going to do this, but a well-designed one is going to have dramatic positive influences on the morale and the camaraderie and the teamwork. And that comes back again to value on investment, shift the focus away from ROI maybe and talk about value on investment. It's incredible. One of the first things we hear, and I love this, is, wow, we put the program in and everybody's smiling and they're working together and just big smiles on their face. Love to hear that.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more in terms of properly built. I think that's always part of my mantra when I'm talking to customers, prospects, or doing presentations for that matter, is it's not a question of saying we have a wellness program or a safety program or a recognition and reward program. Do you have a properly structured program? And how did you determine the structure for that program? Because it can be ineffective to have a poorly designed program. It can actually be counterproductive to truly have a poorly designed program. It can actually backfire on you, and people can lose faith in your company if you build a kind of a shoddy program and launch a shoddy program that doesn't do some of the things we're going to talk about here in a couple minutes about best practices. If you launch that kind of a program, you can definitely, that's one swing at the piñata that didn't work, and you got a chance that you're going to have your employees look at what you put out there and say, well, that's just some half-hearted attempt to get us to do something we don't want to do, as opposed to truly building a program that structurally is designed to motivate behavior, right? And so I was talking a minute ago about safety and wellness and how they come together. This is just a graphic we use in our own operation here, but this wheel, this hub, these spokes on the wheel, these speak to a great many of the things that companies do to motivate their workforce. You see things on this list like sales that probably have little or nothing to do with the people on the phone, although in some capacities you have people who are both salespeople and delivery at the same time, right? They deliver to convenience stores and are also responsible for selling end dial displays and what have you. And so there's crossover really in all of these things potentially, but the two that come together clearly the most, and obviously this is why we're on the phone, are safety and wellness, but then they sort of start to evolve. When you get both in a one place, you can evolve into more of a total rewards program, and this is really a total engagement program for your employees where length of service and spot awards and manager awards and peer-to-peer recognition kind of come together. And at some point, this type of a wheel of benefits for your employees is the type of thing that truly collectively gets them to change their behavior and also makes them far less likely to decide to jump ship. And as I mentioned earlier, millennials, they're here in massive numbers. They're here, and they are very used to getting a pat on the back, a shout out, a gold star in the forehead. I mean, we can lament the everybody gets a trophy generation all we want. I think that's a little overstated over the years, but it's definitely partially true. But this group, and I have nieces and nephews in this age range, they're not going to sit still for a company and a manager who never seems to notice that they're doing a good job. And so it's incumbent on us as a company as a whole to find a way to give that recognition right? Number one reason people leave their job is recognition over compensation, which is remarkable. So it's incumbent on us as a company as a whole to do that. But then you say, okay, well, it's on the company to do that. Why is it my problem? I'm a safety manager. Why is it my problem? I'm the wellness manager. Because you, in the area of safety and wellness, have in many ways the most direct, most obvious way of connecting with these employees. Particularly as from a safety standpoint for a safety-sensitive workforce, and with anybody as it relates to wellness, you have the most obvious way of connecting with them in a positive environment about exercising and losing weight and eating healthy and doing a health assessment and mitigating diseases and working healthy and making safety suggestions and what have you. And so because you have the most obvious path, very often it really is your responsibility, if you want to see it kick in, to get to that place where you're actually, filling in a couple of spokes on the wheel and moving the needle. All right.
Brian, you were talking about the millennial population. As far as wellness is concerned, you cannot address millennials the same way as you do the baby boomers and expect to have the same results. Millennials need to be highly stimulated. So your wellness program has to be tailorable to all of the different demographics. They're different. They're looking, millennials today are highly stimulated, and that's what your wellness program has to be as well if you want them to truly engage for all the right reasons.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I see that in our own programs here in my own company, my own microcosm. The younger they are, the more enthusiastic they are about some of the things that we do that are based on performance as an individual, but also performance as a group. And again, like weight loss competition, we will typically group people together as a way of helping to build camaraderie. But at the same time, or walking competitions, right? We'll pool our steps together. When I reward the groups that do the best, what I'm really doing is rewarding the individual for their individual performance, maybe with an overlay for the group. But you talk about coming in on a Monday morning and seeing your workers hanging over the water cooler or outside talking to each other about what they did that weekend that's going to help their team in the wellness program do better than they did the week before. Real good at building team building. And the same is true on the safety-related examples. So, all right, on this slide here, best practices, we only have three or four slides left here. So let me just tell you that I'm going to talk about these first few bullets on this slide and just hit them real quick, and then the bottom four there we're going to drill down on before we wrap up. Management, influencer support. I alluded to this earlier on. One of the things you can do if you're trying to get your boss, let's just say you came through a presentation, this type of presentation, or from a vendor or what have you, and you said to yourself, God, that's exactly what we need. That's what we need. We need higher levels of engagement. We're going to get it through engaging on safety and wellness, and it's going to lead to a more engaged workforce. We're going to lower that turnover. We're going to do all the things we just talked about. Now you say, okay, but I just heard the presentation. My boss didn't. How am I going to convince my boss? If you distill this down, I think I would say to you, go back to that first slide and other information like that, and myself and Dana and other companies have tons of this type of information for you, and go back to them and say, listen, boss, we're on the wrong end of the spectrum right now. We don't have high levels of engagement, and it's clearly what's leading us to, in many cases, these problems we're having. So I would talk about going into your, looking for a manager influence or influencer support, and I would do that, and I would talk about, wanting your company to be on a list of, top 100 places to work, most innovative companies, best places for millennials to work. You get yourself on a few lists like that, and you're going to be far better off long term in terms of finding and hiring and keeping your talented people. Program structure is a big one. I covered this, so I won't hit it again, but that's basically saying you can't just, it's really important to go survey your workers and talk to your workers, but you need to put guardrails up for them. If you ask your employees fully open-ended questions, like, hey, what do you think we should do for wellness? You might get good information back, but if you heed everything they throw at you, like, oh, just give us a cash reward or do this or do that, you're going to end up with a really poorly structured program. So program structure really matters. You have to apply your own thoughts to that. You should certainly gather information from the field, but in the end I would structure it with the help of a professional who knows exactly how to target behaviors and get results. Individual versus group. I talked about this a little bit. This one is more specific certainly to the safety side and OSHA's opinion of incentive programs. OSHA at one point sort of had a somewhat negative stance. They've softened that stance since, and actually most recently in their most recent rule release, they say really nice things about incentive programs, and they should, because safety incentive programs do tend to move the needle more than anything when they're properly built. The question is, how do you properly build them? And one of the most crucial things there is to reward the individual behavior. You can communicate group goals. Okay, as a group, we want to lower our incident rate. As a group, we want to have fewer claims. As a group, we want to have more safety suggestions. But then you reward the individual behaviors. If you do that, you avoid negative peer pressure that can come from tying everybody together. Right? We've all seen this before, right? if everybody on the second shift or in plant 3 is safe this month, I'm going to throw everybody's name in a hat and I'm going to pick one winner, and that person's going to get a trip to Hawaii, right? That type of program, A, is a waste of money, doesn't work really well, and it also flies in the face of what OSHA likes. But the good news is, regardless of what OSHA likes, is the structure of a program works far better when I say, Bob, Jane, if you do this, you will get that. Okay, if you go above and beyond for safety, you know you're going to get recognized and rewarded, and that becomes systematic. And then we, as a group, we talk about our overall performance, right?
Hey,
Next
can
one
I
is
jump in real fast on
absolutely.
that bullet, Brian? I want to make sure I didn't articulate something that caused confusion earlier, and that is that I mentioned culture being a group. By definition, culture is not addressing people one at a time, but I am 100% on the same page with you that you do have to address individuals personally so that it's relevant, but you also can't forget the group and the social dynamic involved in that really drives culture change. So I'm glad you pointed out that it's both individual and group. I tend to talk a lot about the culture as a group, but individual personal relevance and an actual personalized action plan is absolutely critical.
No, I agree. I think we align there perfectly. Absolutely. It's just the safety world had this this historic history of putting a sign up in front of the building that says, you know, this entire company is 999 days accident free. Well, if you're the guy who hurts his ankle or dents the forklift, are you going to tell your boss instead stop that sign from going to 1,000? And so, you know, accident, hiding, and injury in the safety world is a big no-no. It's a big OSHA no-no, but it's not even necessary from the standpoint of the way you structure a program. That guy who dented the forklift would not hide the injury to avoid, you know, getting his points that month or what have you. He'll tell the truth about that, but he will hide it if he's afraid of screwing, for lack of a better term, the other 999 workers. And so so that's sort of that distinction. But absolutely, communicate group goals, but reward individual behaviors. And within a wellness program, you can also reward groups to a certain extent. Positive reinforcement is sort of self-explanatory, right? You have every method you possibly need to punish your workers, obviously up to and including firing them, right? You can put them on PIPs, you can make them go back to training, and of course you can let them go. You don't need your recognition reward program to have a negative component to it. This speaks to one of those things that maybe seem like a good idea in an idea session, but not really be a good method in practice. So these programs are purely one-directional. You reward proper behavior. And the only punishment for not getting it right is you simply don't get rewarded, but you don't go out there and take away points or take away prizes or otherwise punish people in a program. If they're that bad of an employee, let them go. But if they're part of a wellness program, a safety program, a combined program, you're there to reward the good behavior to get more of it. Expand the reach really speaks to those wheels that I was showing you earlier. Okay, we started off with safety. Let's add wellness. All right, we started wellness. Let's add safety. Okay, we have safety and wellness. What about peer-to-peer recognition? What about manager spot awards? The other types of things that, again, might be fairly low budget lifts, but add another element to the program. Years of service, right? Why wouldn't you want the program that rewards somebody for being there for 10 years and for being safe on the job and for being healthy on the job and maybe for being, you know, for nominations from their peer, all to roll into the same place, so you have one, you know, XYZ company total rewards program. Really tough for an employee to ignore that, and really powerful to have that in your arsenal. Deliver recognition. Again, this is what this whole presentation's about, so I think you get that. The bottom line is it's not enough to just say, you know, to reward somebody in a vacuum. You want to do it, if at all possible, in a way that actually makes that person feel like they're recognized. And same thing with making it personal. Face-to-face recognition is huge. That's one of the beauties of wellness programs. There's a lot of face-to-face interaction, a lot of human connection there, but it makes it so much more powerful when as a group you're succeeding, when as a group you're changing the culture, and maybe even as a group getting, you know, seeing that you're being rewarded or that someone else in your team's being rewarded for their performance. Again, safety, health, wellness related. Benchmark and measure. This is, you'd sit there and say, well, of course, why is that one even on the list? Doesn't everybody benchmark their program and measure their results? No, they don't. Actually, the stats show, generally speaking, less than 25% of companies typically go back and measure the results of the programs they put in place. I can tell you, speaking on behalf of All-Star Incentive Marketing, and I suspect Dana as well at Sonic Boom, we're all about measurement, right? We launch these programs for our customers, and they put them out there for their employees, and we are diligently making sure that our clients you know, benchmark up front by doing surveys and gathering information so they know where they started, and then measuring the results. I mean, what good is it otherwise, right? if you put out a survey to your workforce before you ever launch a new program, and you say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much does this company care about my safety? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much does this company care about my health and wellness, right? And your average score comes back at a 7.2. Fine. You had that piece of information before you launched the program. Then you went ahead and spent some money and you put out a safety and or wellness recognition reward program. You want to know 6 months later the answer to that same question and a year after that. Okay, and if you went from a 7.2 to an 8.1 to a 9.3 over the course of a couple of years by having this type of program and communication out there, I promise you, if those types of engagement numbers are climbing the ladder, your company's gotten a hell of a lot safer, healthier, and frankly, the bottom line is coming up as well. 4-to-1 average return on investment for these types of programs when they're deployed properly and they reach a level of maturity. So it really is a spend money to save money type of environment. And lastly, on these first group patients, it is a spend money to save money type of environment, but it's a return on investment. The return comes after the investment, right? I've seen programs before that are launched, really well-built programs that are going to do really well, and 3 months in, somebody says, I don't know, I can't tell the difference, just shut the thing down, right? You have to give it time to ferment, to turn into the, sort of the rallying cry for the company, and it does take a little bit of patience. But inside of 9 to 12 months, any program like this that was built right, that's out the door, will start to move the needle. And inside of 2 to 3 years, you'll see a huge change, especially if you look back at the measurements you had when you first started that program. Okay, I'm just going to hit the last couple of slides here with Dana's help, and we're going to talk about these are still what I consider to be best practices, keys to success, but we're going to call them out a little bit more detail on the use of tangible rewards, on technology, branding, and communication. I'll take this one. I'll give Dana the next one. This one is about tangible rewards. Again, I'm sure we've been at a lot of safety trade shows over the year, done a lot of webinars, talked to, every day we talk to safety professionals. I suspect most of you get this by now. Cash is a terrible motivator. Cash is literally a waste of money. I can't say that enough. There are study after study after study that shows this, and there's just human nature. And for that matter, if you just think about your own life, you realize what I'm saying is true. If you have a program right now and you're along the lines of what we're talking about, to motivate health and healthy behavior and safe behavior, and then the reward there is that you give them cash, you're literally burning your money. Because while everybody will tell you they want cash, I want cash too. Okay, we all will say the same thing, so are all of your employees. If you say to them, hey, we're going to run this program, we're going to recognize and reward you for being safer and healthier on the job, what do you want as a reward? They're all going to say, give us cash. Of course that is. That's what they want. That's not what you want. What you want is a safer workforce and a healthier workforce, and you get there through the use of things that are tangible and that have memory value. Okay, so this slide here kind of speaks to some of that. When people are rewarded with cash, my favorite one on that list is 15% said they never got it. This is shortly after rewarding them. They're like, you never gave me cash. Most of them put it into their checkbook, paid bills, don't have any idea what they did with it, and it just is not memorable. And really falling into that exact same category, almost at the exact same level, are prepaid cards, gift cards, gas cards, same thing. There's no such thing as a memorable tank of gas. Nobody's going to be sitting there 6 months later and go, oh, you know what, I'm an active participant in my company's wellness program or safety program because, boy, they bought me a tank of gas 2 years ago. It just doesn't work that way. They will, however, go home, throw a steak on that barbecue grill that they got as a safety reward for being a really strong safety and wellness performer over 2 years, and they will tell their neighbors forever and a day, for as long as that grill is in their possession, that they got it as a reward for being safe on the job. Okay, that's simply the way it works, and it's the same with Fitbits and other things that target wellness or Yetis or what have you. I've asked this. I've gone to more meetings than I'll ever remember, and I asked this question, and it's always the same. I said, "Do you ever remember being rewarded with something tangible? And can you tell me what that was?" And I had a guy not long ago tell me he got a wheelbarrow 20 years ago, and he never forgot where he got it. Right? That's just the way it works. If I asked that guy what he got, if he ever got rewarded, he probably did. He probably got $200 in cash 20 years ago earlier as well, and there's no shot he remembers it. So you need them to be able to attach the reward to the behavior in order to change that behavior, and only tangible rewards do that, and really particularly high brand name tangible rewards. Okay, experiential travel as well fits that bill. Sending somebody away on a weekend vacation with their wife or letting them redeem their points for that type of travel obviously can have the same type of memory value. But in the end, you want the guy who wants DeWalt to go get himself a DeWalt screwdriver, Ray-Ban sunglasses, Callaway golf clubs, Sony TVs. These are the things that people will put into their wish list, object of their affection, and they will as a result of seeing that kind of motivation, join the walking club, join the biking team related to work, take that health assessment, follow up and take a survey or a quiz related to their hypertension, and truly begin to change their behavior, because this will remind them what's in it for them. Next thing I want to talk about is technology. And Dana, why don't I give this one to you, because I think technology, as prevalent as it is everywhere, is particularly strong in the way the wellness programs are delivered.
Absolutely. It really gives us an advantage in reaching more people and in reaching people where it's a more personalized experience. So while I commend the people who have a grassroots program at work and they've done a really good job of putting together their walking contests or something like that, I will say that it's going to get boring. It's not going to reach everybody. It's not scalable. So let's use technology. We've got it today. One of the most important things is to make sure that we are driving long-term behavior improvement, whether it's safety, physical activity, nutrition, or all of the above. And the only way to do that is to create programs that people love and want to take part in. So one of the biggest complaints we hear about wellness when we hear that it's quote unquote ineffective is that we just don't get engagement, or people are only going in to get their incentives. And so what we say is if they love the programs, they're going to do the programs regardless of what's driving them to get there. They're going to do it because they want to. Another reason that technology is so important is because we don't want to rely on self-reported information. So if you've got a contest and you're having people log on an Excel spreadsheet their number of steps, you're always going to hear, I think Karen's cheating because there's no way she got 23,000 steps yesterday. So technology is one of the great ways to rely on validated information. Now you're wearing a Fitbit, you're wearing a Garmin, whatever your device is, it's pulled through automatically and all of that information is there. The other great thing about technology is we want people doing wellness at work. Absolutely, we talked about the importance of why wellness at work, but we also want them doing it 24/7. So when they're at home, if they're wearing a device and it pulls through automatically to your wellness portal, they're getting credit for that. We want them thinking and doing wellness 24/7 at work, not at work.
Yeah, great point. Absolutely true. And the same thing with safety, right? I mean, in my mature safety recognition reward programs, we're promoting safety not just on the job, but also in the home, and we're doing that with technology. We're doing that with surveys and other things. We do surveys now that specifically target safety in the home, and we ask questions of employees of a company, how do you promote safety in your home? What topics do you talk about? Safety topics do you talk about with your family? And we get all kinds of great answers about gun safety and water safety and stranger danger and what have you, and it's obviously driving safety as it relates to teenagers. And it's really, when you start getting conversations in the home and wellness conversations and safety conversations in the home, you've really hit another level in terms of
and driving engagement. So an employee is going to be far more engaged in the wellness program if his or her spouse is engaged in the program and the kids are engaged in the program. The employee is going to be way more engaged in that wellness program. That's going to drive the long-term behavior improvement that you really want to see.
Yep, absolutely. I've been to events for clients where the spouses are invited and the spouses come up to us and talk to us about the recognition reward program, and the very fact that they know about it tells you that it's being discussed in the home, and obviously you've really hit a home run at that point. All right, last two slides, and this is just talk. This was a topic for a webinar I delivered just on this very subject matter, because it's not exactly second nature. It might be second nature to a sales manager or to a customer, somebody in charge of consumer loyalty and what have you. But it really is about branding and communicating your program. Okay, one of the huge to-dos in creating a successful program, a successful safety and wellness program with a recognition and reward component, the kind of thing that's going to drive, again, what are we talking here about? Engagement. The thing that's going to do that, that's crucial to doing that, one of the most important things, is putting a brand name on it, right? So as I said earlier, you don't just call it, you don't say, oh, it's called our XYZ Safety and Wellness Program. It's a missed opportunity, okay? People respond to brand names, and brand names communicate strength and power, and people know that the company has put an effort behind it, and it becomes the kind of mantra that anybody would know and understand that the company is really putting a lot of effort behind this. And so when we work with clients, we insist that we create brand names and that we use every method possible to promote those brand names. So certainly technology, screen size, whether it's a mobile phone, smartphone, all the way up to a PC. But then we use all kinds of other activities within that program, surveys and quizzes, wish list functionality, group segmentation, what have you. All of these features of a program are meant to make the program sticky, right? Sticky, meaning that the brand name really sank in. people understand what initiative this is about and why it's so important to the company. And so first thing is to put a brand name on it. And the second part is, again, communication side, and not just technology, which we just talked about, and of course would be a big part of any program, and all the different ways in which through social media sites and SMS messaging and emails and mobile devices you can communicate, but also printed materials, right? I grew up in a world where all of these programs were delivered on printed catalogs with point lists and order forms and what have you, and letters, and that's sort of an era gone by. And yet, while we no longer have to print a catalog to convey the rewards program, we do choose to print an awful lot of materials that convey the overall spirit of the program, because I want it sitting on a coffee table in their house. I want it in the visor in the car. I want them to see the poster hanging on the wall. My client wants this type of constant communication is the type of thing that will allow people to A, know that there's power behind the message, and B, continue to perform in the program. And these programs need to stay dynamic, right? So particularly on the technology side, once they're launched, you have opportunities to change news stories, add graphics, issue new surveys and quizzes to keep it top of mind. But these are the things. And this is the heavy lift.
Can I tie that technology and communications together real fast too? So push notifications to the phone. What a great way to remind somebody to log their activity. They can be driving a truck, and you can push a notification to their phone and still have them engaged in the wellness and safety programs.
Yep, totally agree. So that, folks, we didn't leave ourselves a ton of time, but that's our presentation. There's myself and Dana, and I would just, in the couple minutes we have remaining, Maureen, maybe we can squeeze in at least 2 or 3 questions.
We can. Thanks, Brian and Dana, for a great presentation. Now, before we get to your questions, I just wanted to remind everyone we would love your feedback in our webinar survey. It helps us improve our programs. And now for our first question. Ed asks, does a program rewarding individual behavior require definitions of what behavior will earn awards?
Let me start that on the safety side, and then Dana, feel free to jump in on the wellness side. Yes and no. So you generally speaking, it would be great to define behaviors. So you can get very specific on behaviors, but then you can also sort of open it up where you're a category of behavior, right? So examples of both. You can specifically say that I'm going to reward somebody for making a safety suggestion or reporting a near miss. That's very specific, and obviously a person would fully understand what that would entail. But at the same time, that same program can talk about that somebody supporting the core goals of the company, right? So an employee demonstrating the core values of this company can be rewarded as well. Now, obviously, that's less specific, but that employee who, let's just say that I stick around late, take the new guy under my wing and help explain the lockout tagout procedures to him, right? From a safety perspective, it didn't specifically say that that was going to be something I could get a spot award for, but it was certainly covered under the whole idea of core values and supporting your fellow workers. So a little bit of both. You can be very specific on things like suggestions, just as an example, or you join a safety committee, you're going to get rewarded. Thank you for doing that. But at the same time, you might get rewarded for joining the safety committee, even if it wasn't specifically articulated, just because joining that safety committee is very much in support of one of our core values.
And on the wellness side of things, I would say absolutely you need to be specific actually from a legal standpoint. So while you can give them opportunity to choose 3 of 5 activities or 6 of 8 activities in order to be rewarded, you absolutely have to provide alternatives and very specific alternatives. Otherwise, you're running into compliance issues with the EEOC and others. So yes, I would say from the wellness side of things, you want to be super specific about what you're rewarding and to whom.
Deborah has an interesting and timely question. How is this handled regarding reporting for tax purposes for the team member?
Oh, yeah, tax, that 4-letter word. I know it's only got 3 letters. So the tax situation, again, we'll do a little bifurcation here of safety and wellness. On the safety side, safety incentive programs were linked to, through efforts done by the Incentive Marketing Association 20 or 30 years ago. Safety incentive programs were linked from a tax preference standpoint to service award programs. So in a service award program, you can reward your workforce up to a certain percentage for 5, 10, 15, 20 years on the job, for annual service awards. And it's tax deductible. The cost of that program is tax deductible to the employer, and the gifts themselves to the employees are tax-free. But that's only up to a certain percentage. So a portion of safety recognition reward incentive programs has favorable tax treatment, but if you, depending on how far you go with it, you may have to get to a point where you lose those tax benefits. The program is still beneficial, but the tax benefits aren't there. I have anybody who asked that question who wants more on that, I have a paper that sort of specifically outlines that, and I can just tell you that I was specifically in D.C. on a number of occasions to specifically, this was during the ACA, the Obamacare debates, and we tried really hard to get wellness programs attached to that as well, but weren't able to do so at the time. So I don't know that wellness programs have any special tax treatment. Dana, do you?
No, they've talked about doing it for small companies, but they actually haven't put anything in place, in that sense. And we talk a lot about de minimis benefits and things like that, but we typically just tell people talk with your tax attorneys when we're talking about individual rewards, at least.
Yeah, always safer. And the bottom line is these programs are wildly successful and important and worthwhile, but to only a small extent, either because de minimis value, let's say in a wellness program, you're rewarding people, but it's below a certain level. The feds don't necessarily want you to, from a tax standpoint, because it's too in states because it's the value's too low. In other words, if you're giving people, 10 points or $10 worth of points for an accomplishment, it is probably below that de minimis value. And to a certain extent, safety programs, much like service award programs, are protected. But happy to push off additional information on that if needed.
Carl wants to know if you have any thoughts about using robotics and automation to monitor and manage safety in the workplace.
Well, I mean, it's here, right? I mean, robotics and automation are here, and they're here to stay, along with artificial intelligence and cognitive reasoning. There's no doubt about it. We know certainly the HR space is clearly using a lot of artificial intelligence is really just better data processing, but however you want to look at it, artificial intelligence to try to figure out if they're hiring the right people for the right jobs. And robotics and automation is clearly a trend that's not going to be reversed. And so I would suggest that, there are all types of important aspects of working side by side with robots, and from a production standpoint, from a safety standpoint, and I think I would have that woven into my program. If my company was heavily automated in that regard, I think I certainly would have that aspect of the program factored in some way, shape, or form.
You might have time for a quick one. What is your annual budget on safety and wellness?
Sure. Again, Dana, let's separate this. On the safety side, it's very dependent on the size. Well, not really the size of the company, but the challenge that the company has. So, if you're a company that has a safety-sensitive workforce that's, let's just say, in processing chicken in a plant, right, or working indoors in a manufacturing application, or any number of things like that, where you don't have large, heavy vehicles and equipment, and vehicles on the road and heavy equipment operation or what have you. Usually the budget, sort of a bare minimum budget on that, starts off at $10 per user per month, and generally speaking, I'd round that's $120 per participant per year, and usually $50. So I really think it takes about $150 per year to have an effective program, the likes of which I've been describing here, for a safety-sensitive workforce that is not on the road. Okay. When you get to, and that's an entry point. I mean, I would encourage people to think about spending a little more than that, but that's about where it starts. When you get into to have a true 24/7, 365 program, when you get into heavy equipment operators, vehicles on the road, working in elevated places, any number of other much more safety-sensitive positions, you should really be looking at double or triple that. So anywhere from $150 up to say $400 per year in the budgeting to catch the attention of somebody with the recognition reward part of a program. If you have less than that, there's still plenty of things you can do, but you can't necessarily do a program that really that hits that audience day in, day out.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions today. Please join me in thanking Brian Galanick and Dana Korn for their presentation, as well as our sponsors, All-Star and Sonic Boom. If you have additional questions or comments, just click on the Email Us button on the console, and please visit webinars.ishn.com for the archive of this presentation, as well as information about our upcoming events. We appreciate your time and hope that you have found this webinar to be a valuable experience. Thanks.